Jehovah's Witnesses often appeal to a handful of New Testament texts to justify their practice of strict so-called shunning. On their official Watchtower website article called Disfellowshipping, How to View It, they describe the refusal to fellowship with an expelled person on any spiritual or social level. Then they cite Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 verse 11. Quit mixing in company, not even eating with such a man. They say that a meal is a time of relaxation and socializing. Hence, the Bible here rules out social fellowship too, such as joining an expelled person in a picnic or party, ball game, trip to the beach or theater, or sitting down to a meal with him. And we all know from our experience over the years that a simple quote hello to someone can be the first step that develops into a conversation and maybe even a friendship. Would we want to take that first step with a disfellowship person, they ask? Now, some of the passages cited certainly use strong language, like do not associate, keep away, turn away, do not receive him into your house. The question is, what situations are those biblical texts actually addressing, and do they really support the Watchtower system known as shunning? Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 says, "It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that does not even exist among Gentiles, that someone has his father's wife." Paul then says the church must not tolerate this blatant, ongoing, incestuous relationship. "I am now writing to you not to associate with anyone who is called a brother if he is sexually immoral or greedy or an idolater or a verbal abuser or a drunkard or a swindler. Do not even eat with such a one." This is clearly about a person who still claims to be a Christian while living in open, public sexual immorality. Paul is not talking about someone who has left the church, or someone the elders have decided to label and, quote, apostate for questioning the organization. Paul restricts this judgment very specifically to those, quote, who are called a brother, current church members who insist on publicly practicing unrepentant sexual immorality. Paul also makes a point of saying that such rules do not apply to non-church members in general. Just a few verses earlier, he explained, "I was not at all meaning with the sexually immoral of this world, or with the greedy and swindlers or idolaters, for then you would have to go out of the world." So this is not a rule about how to treat your non-Christian neighbor or relative. It's about the integrity of the church itself. The phrase, "do not even eat with such a one," has to be read in that context. In the first century church, shared meals were deeply tied to Christian fellowship, and often to the Lord's Supper. Refusing to eat with him means you cannot treat this person as if part of the church, warmly included in fellowship while in disobedience to Jesus. It's not a blanket command to refuse ordinary human conversation, or to outlaw all social contact of every kind, especially with family members. And even here the goal is restoration, not permanent exile. In 2 Corinthians 2, when the man has apparently repented, Paul urges the church to forgive, comfort, and reaffirm your love for him, so that he is not overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. That spirit of eager restoration stands in sharp contrast to years-long, open-ended shunning, where contact is minimal or non-existent, even when someone is desperately broken by the loss. Similar patterns appear in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. There the problem is not sexual immorality, but idleness and disorder. Some Christians had stopped working, perhaps thinking the Lord's coming was so near that ordinary work no longer mattered, and were depending on others to support them. Again, the situation is clearly inside the church. The person is a, quote, brother, whose behavior is undermining order and responsibility. The phrase "not associating" is meant to be a wake-up call, so that he may be ashamed, a loving pressure designed to make him reconsider his path. And Paul will not allow anyone to treat such a person as if he were an enemy. That line, "do not regard him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother," means they are not a total unbeliever, but still a Christian. Whatever form this keeping away took in practice, it had to remain within the framework of Christian love, concern, and ongoing admonition. But even if the Christian has lost all faith and become a literal enemy of the faith, Jesus did command absolute love of enemies in Matthew 5. It's very hard to square that with a system where people are trained not even to say hello, not to sit with them at a family meal, not to answer a normal phone call, even if an emergency. That sort of irrational, unloving cutting off is not even consistent with the command to love your enemies. Romans 16 verse 17 is sometimes invoked as well. In this case, Paul is clearly concerned with divisive, deceptive teachers, people who are actively creating stumbling blocks and spreading doctrine at odds with what the Roman Christians had received from the apostles. So to turn away from them is to refuse to follow them, refuse to grant them a voice and influence in the congregation. Paul is guarding the flock from harmful leadership. He's not giving a general rule about how every ordinary Christian must treat every ex-Christian in all areas of life. Avoiding divisive false teachers in a church setting is not the same as severing social ties with your adult child or grandkids, or refusing to attend a family event because someone disfellowshipped will be present. And at first glance, 2 John 1 seems to be the strongest text for shunning. But it's important to notice John's description of these people back in verse 7. Many deceivers have gone into the world, those who do not confess Jesus Messiah as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. The people he's warning about are not passive ex-Christians. They are evangelist deceivers, missionaries of error, who have gone out into the world, aggressively spreading a false Christology. In the early church, such traveling teachers depended heavily on hospitality. To receive into your house meant to give them food and lodging, and likely to allow them to use your home as a base for teaching others. So when John tells Christians not to receive them or even say hello, he is saying, do not host and endorse these deceivers as if they were true Christian workers. Do not give them a platform or practical support. He even clarifies the kind of greeting in view, greeting them as a, quote, fellow believer, a Christian. He is not forbidding the most basic forms of human civility. He's drawn a boundary around Christian recognition and support, not around all forms of normal social or family interaction. When we put all of this together, the New Testament does show that there are times when a church must practice discipline. That can mean refusing Christian fellowship to an unrepentant so-called brother, keeping some distance from a disorderly church member, or refusing to support divisive and deceptive teachers. But all of this is done with protection and restoration in view, and always within the attitude Paul describes. Do not regard him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. By contrast, Jehovah's Witness commands people to treat disfellowship ones almost as if they were enemies. No greeting, no conversation, no ordinary civility, even to cut family completely off who have simply left the organization. That clashes not only with Paul's words, but with Jesus' own clear command to love your enemies and to pray for those who persecute you. If we must show love, mercy, and practical kindness even to enemies, how can it be right to deny basic human civility and contact to a former Christian or family and friends? The Watchtower's version of so-called shunning does not match the spirit of the Messiah, who taught us to reflect our Father's character by loving, blessing, and doing good to all people, even those who have left or oppose us.